In a courtroom filled with tension, a young voice cut through the chaos, leaving everyone stunned. Noah, a 10-year-old boy with determination beyond his years, stood in the middle of a high-profile murder trial and revealed a secret that no one could ignore. The trial centered around Daniel Hayes, a man accused of a crime so heinous that the community had already decided his guilt. The evidence seemed airtight, and the prosecutors were relentless. Yet, Noah's unexpected interruption changed everything. With his messy blonde hair and wide blue eyes, he was just a boy, but his words carried the weight of truth. As whispers spread through the courtroom and the judge struggled to maintain order, one question lingered in everyone's mind: what did Noah know? Could his revelation free an innocent man? Or would it lead to even more shocking discoveries? This is the story of courage, truth, and the extraordinary moment a child defied the odds to stand up for what was right. Stay with us as we unravel how a single voice dared to change the course of justice. The courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers as the prosecutor passionately laid out their case against the defendant. The atmosphere was tense. Every eye focused on the stern judge seated behind the towering bench. The defendant, Daniel Hayes, sat at the defense table. His shoulders slumped, the weight of the accusations visibly crushing him. Then, suddenly, a voice broke through the proceedings like a clap of thunder. "Stop the trial. I have something to say." Gasps rippled through the room as all heads turned toward the courtroom aisle. There, standing small but unshaken, was Noah, a boy no older than 10. His messy blonde hair and wide blue eyes gave him an innocent look, but his determined stance and the tremor in his voice suggested otherwise. The judge, a stern woman with silver-rimmed glasses, froze mid-sentence. Her gavel, poised to strike, hovered in the air. She fixed Noah with a sharp glare, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "Bailiff, remove this child from the courtroom." Before the bailiff could move, Noah raised his voice again. "You can't throw me out. I know something that will change everything." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled for their notebooks. Spectators whispered furiously. And even the defense attorney dropped their pen in shock. Daniel Hayes, seated at the defense table, stared at Noah as if seeing a ghost. "Order! Order in the court!" The judge slammed her gavel repeatedly, her commanding tone struggling to quell the pandemonium. When the room finally quieted, she turned her piercing gaze back to Noah. "What could you possibly know, son?" she demanded. "This is a murder trial. You have no place here." Noah swallowed hard, his small hands clenching at his sides. His voice trembled, but he didn't back down. "I was there," he said. "The day it happened. I saw something." The courtroom fell into an eerie silence, the kind that made every word echo like a shout. The judge leaned forward, her skepticism mixed with a trace of curiosity. "And what exactly did you see?" she asked, her tone measured but stern. Noah hesitated, glancing briefly at the defendant. Then, summoning every ounce of courage, he pointed directly at Daniel Hayes. "It wasn't him," Noah declared. "I know who really did it." The tension in the room became unbearable. Daniel Hayes's expression shifted from disbelief to something resembling hope, a fragile, fleeting emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Before Noah could explain further, the courtroom doors burst open, and a man in a dark suit rushed in, his face pale and frantic. "Noah," the man shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. "What are you doing here?" The boy flinched at the sound of his name but didn't turn around. His gaze remained locked on the judge. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now. "You have to listen to me." The judge hesitated, her usually firm demeanor momentarily softened by the boy's plea. She motioned for the bailiff to approach. "Take him to my chambers," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We'll continue this privately. Everyone else, stay seated. This trial is not over." As the bailiff gently led Noah toward the door, the boy glanced back over his shoulder. His eyes, a mixture of fear and determination, seemed to burn with a truth he was desperate to share. The heavy doors closed behind him with a thud, leaving the courtroom buzzing with unanswered questions. What had Noah seen that could possibly change the course of the trial? The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the small park where children laughed and played, their carefree energy filling the air. Among them was Noah, riding his bike along the winding paths. His messy blonde hair glinted in the sunlight as he pedaled, feeling the wind rush against his face. It was a perfect summer afternoon, or so it seemed. As Noah rounded a bend near the lake, he slowed his bike to a stop. Something caught his attention, a man and a woman standing near the water. Their voices muffled but their body language intense. The man's gestures were sharp and aggressive, his arm repeatedly pointing toward the woman, who shook her head and crossed her arms defensively. Noah's carefree joy was replaced by an uneasy feeling, a knot tightening in his stomach. He quietly rolled his bike behind a large tree, his heart pounding as he peeked out to watch. The man's voice grew louder, though the words were still unclear. The woman took a step back, her face a mix of fear and defiance. Then, suddenly, the man grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away, her lips moving quickly. Was she shouting? Noah couldn't tell. His breath quickened as the man forcibly guided her toward a nearby car. The woman struggled, her movements frantic. The man glanced around, his eyes darting nervously. Noah shrank further behind the tree, terrified the man would see him. In what felt like an instant, the man shoved the woman into the car and slammed the door. Noah's hands gripped the handlebars of his bike so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He wanted to do something, anything, but he was just a kid. What could he possibly do? The car sped off, leaving a trail of dust behind. Noah stayed frozen in place, his mind racing with questions. Who were they? What had just happened? Should he tell someone? That evening, he tried explaining what he'd seen to his mom. "I think something bad happened," he said, his voice trembling. But his mom only smiled softly and ruffled his hair. "It's probably just a couple having an argument. Sweetheart, don't worry about it." Noah wanted to believe her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For days, he replayed the scene in his mind, the man's sharp gestures, the woman's panicked resistance, the way the car sped off. A week later, The unease in Noah's heart turned to dread. While watching the evening news, a familiar face flashed across the screen. It was the man from the park. His name was Kyle Becker. And he was the prime suspect in the murder of Alyssa Green, his ex-girlfriend. Noah's heart sank. Alyssa's body had been found in the woods near the park. And Kyle was accused of killing her after an argument. Witnesses had reported hearing them fighting that night. And Kyle's fingerprints were all over her belongings. The town was abuzz with speculation. And most people were convinced of Kyle's guilt. But Noah couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. The woman in the park had blonde hair, while Alyssa's was dark. Could it have been someone else? The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. Why hadn't Kyle fled if he was guilty? Who was the woman in the park? And what role did she play in this? 4 weeks. Noah wrestled with whether he should come forward. He was afraid no one would believe him. But the weight of what he knew was suffocating. He started having nightmares, Alyssa's face pale and lifeless, her voice asking him why he didn't speak up. Eventually, Noah realized he couldn't stay silent. What he had seen might be the key to uncovering the truth. Even though he was just a kid, he knew he had to try. This was the moment his journey began, the moment he decided to risk everything to bring justice to light. For weeks after witnessing the incident in the park, Noah couldn't shake the unease that clung to him like a shadow. The image of the man forcing the woman into the car replayed in his mind every time he closed his eyes. At first, he tried to push it away, convincing himself it wasn't his problem. But the news of Alyssa Green's murder changed everything. Noah started having nightmares. In them, Alyssa's face was pale and lifeless, her wide, unblinking eyes staring straight at him. Her voice echoed in his dreams, asking over and over, "Why didn't you help me?" He'd wake up drenched in sweat, his chest tight with guilt. He wanted to tell someone, anyone, but the same thought always stopped him: what if no one believes me? He was just a kid. The police had their suspect. And the evidence against Kyle Becker seemed solid. What difference would his story make? But as the trial approached, the weight of his silence became unbearable. He couldn't stop thinking about the blonde-haired woman he had seen in the park. If it wasn't Alyssa, who was it? Could the truth be hiding in that moment he'd witnessed? One night, after another nightmare, Noah made up his mind. He sat in his room, staring at the news article on his tablet about the trial, his hands trembling. He had to do something. If he stayed silent, an innocent man could go to prison or worse. The real culprit might never face justice. His opportunity came unexpectedly. His mom was summoned for jury duty, and Noah begged her to let him come along. "I'll be quiet. I promise," he said, giving her his best puppy dog eyes. "I just want to see what a courtroom looks like." His mom hesitated but eventually gave in. "Fine," she said, handing him a book and a granola bar. "But you stay on this bench. No running around. No talking." Noah nodded, though his heart raced. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew this was his chance. When they arrived at the courthouse, Noah sat where his mom told him. But as soon as she disappeared into the jury room, he slipped away, guided more by determination than a plan. He found his way to the courtroom where Kyle Becker's trial was underway. Noah's anxiety skyrocketed as he opened the heavy doors. The room was packed. Every seat filled with reporters, lawyers, and spectators. He slid into a spot in the back, his heart pounding in his chest. As the prosecutor laid out the case against Kyle, Noah's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't sit still any longer. He had to speak up. Gathering every ounce of courage, he stood, his voice breaking the tense silence. "Stop the trial. I have something to say." In that moment, Noah's fear didn't vanish. But it no longer mattered. The truth weighed heavier than his fear. And he was ready to share it no matter the cost. Noah's decision to speak out wasn't the end of his journey, it was just the beginning. After his courtroom revelation, the judge agreed to hear him out in private. But his testimony alone wouldn't be enough to overturn the case against Kyle Becker. The judge made it clear, they needed corroborating evidence. Noah felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had taken a step toward the truth. But now he had to prove it. Determined, Noah began piecing together what he knew. Late at night, when his mom thought he was asleep, he scrolled through news articles and social media posts about Alyssa's murder. One particular post caught his eye, a blurry photo from the park on the day Alyssa went missing. It wasn't much. But in the background, barely visible, was a dark blue sedan with a dent in the rear bumper, the same car Noah had seen that day. Noah's pulse quickened. Who owned that car? As he dug deeper, he found a name that kept popping up: Kyle Becker, Alyssa's ex-boyfriend. According to news reports, Kyle and Alyssa had a volatile relationship that ended just months before her death. Witnesses claimed to have heard them arguing the night she disappeared. And Kyle's fingerprints were found on her belongings. But something didn't sit right with Noah. The man he saw in the park didn't look angry, he looked desperate and scared. And there was the blonde woman. Who was she? And why hadn't anyone mentioned her? Noah's search led him to Kyle's social media profile. His posts around the time of Alyssa's disappearance were vague and unsettling. One post, just 2 days before she went missing, read, "If she thinks she can walk away from me, she's wrong. I won't let her." Noah took a screenshot and saved it. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was a clue. Days later, while riding his bike near the edge of town, Noah spotted the dark blue sedan parked outside a rundown storage facility. His heart raced as he recognized the dent in the bumper. It was Kyle's car. Noah hesitated, his instincts telling him to call the police. But curiosity and determination pushed him forward. He hid his bike behind a dumpster and crept toward the storage unit, staying low and quiet. Inside, he heard voices, Kyle's, along with another man's. They were arguing. "You think this will go away?" one voice said. "The kid's already talking. We need to shut this down." Noah's blood ran cold. "They're talking about me," he realized. He leaned closer, trying to catch more of the conversation. But his foot accidentally knocked over a loose piece of metal. The noise echoed through the quiet lot. "Who's there?" Kyle's voice barked. Noah bolted, his heart pounding as he ran toward his bike. Behind him, the storage unit door slammed open, and heavy footsteps followed. "Get back here, kid!" Kyle shouted. Noah barely made it to his bike before Kyle could grab him, pedaling as fast as he could. He rode straight to the nearest police station, his legs burning and his lungs gasping for air. When he burst into the station, out of breath and shaking, he told Officer Ramirez everything about the car, the voices, and the threats. The police took him seriously this time. A team of officers, led by Ramirez, accompanied Noah back to the storage facility. Kyle's car was still there, and the storage unit door was slightly ajar. The officers moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. Ramirez called out, her voice firm and commanding, "Kyle Becker. Come out with your hands up." There was a long pause before the door creaked open, and Kyle stepped out, his face pale. He raised his hands, but his expression was defiant. Inside the unit, the police found a trove of evidence, Alyssa's belongings, a burner phone with incriminating messages, and a charm bracelet that matched one Alyssa was known to wear. It was clear Kyle had been hiding much more than anyone realized. But the most shocking discovery came later. Rachel Daniels, Alyssa's best friend, had been hiding in fear. The blonde woman Noah had seen in the park wasn't Alyssa, it was Rachel. She confirmed that Kyle and his accomplices had threatened her into silence. With Rachel's testimony and the evidence from the storage unit, the case against Kyle became airtight. The pieces finally fit together, and the truth was undeniable. Noah had done it. His courage and determination had uncovered the truth, bringing justice to Alyssa and exposing Kyle's lies. But as he watched the police lead Kyle away in handcuffs, Noah realized the danger wasn't entirely over. He had stepped into a world of darkness, and some shadows wouldn't fade easily. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and legal professionals as Noah prepared to take the stand. Despite his young age, he stood with a quiet determination, gripping the sunflower bracelet he had found at the park, a symbol of the truth he had fought so hard to uncover. The judge, her stern expression softened slightly, addressed him. "Noah, you understand the importance of telling the truth here today?" Noah nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." As the defense attorney began questioning him, Noah recounted everything he had seen that day in the park: the argument, the blonde-haired woman, and the dark blue sedan. His voice wavered at times, but the strength of his conviction shone through. "I knew it wasn't Alyssa," he said firmly, glancing at Kyle Becker, who sat at the defense table with a scowl on his face. "It was someone else. And I had to make sure people knew the truth." The room hung on his every word. Even the jury seemed captivated by the courage of the young boy who had defied all odds to bring new light to the case. But the turning point came when Rachel Daniels, Alyssa's best friend, took the stand. After being located by police, Rachel agreed to testify, revealing the truth about the day Noah had seen her in the park. Rachel's voice trembled as she described how Kyle had threatened her into silence after Alyssa's death. "I was too scared to come forward," she admitted, her hands shaking as she gripped the edges of the witness stand. "But Noah, he was brave enough to speak up. And because of him, I'm here today." Her testimony was damning. She confirmed that Kyle had lured Alyssa to the park under false pretenses and that she had tried to stop him, leading to the argument Noah had witnessed. When Alyssa tried to leave, Kyle attacked her, and Rachel had been too terrified to intervene. The defense team tried to cast doubt on her credibility, But the evidence from the storage unit sealed Kyle's fate. The bracelet, the burner phone, and the photos all pointed to his guilt, leaving little room for doubt. As the trial drew to a close, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The judge's gavel silenced the murmurs as she addressed the jury. "You've heard the evidence. Now it's time to render your verdict." The jury deliberated for hours. But to Noah, it felt like days. He sat with his mom, his small hands clenched tightly in his lap. Finally, the jury filed back into the room, their expressions somber but resolute. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The jury foreperson stood and cleared his throat. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Kyle Becker, guilty." The room erupted. Gasps and whispers filled the air, followed by the sound of the judge's gavel demanding order. Kyle Becker's face hardened as the reality of the verdict sank in. He was led away in handcuffs, his defiance replaced with an air of defeat. His accomplices, identified through Rachel's testimony, would face their own trials. As the courtroom emptied, Noah remained seated, his heart finally feeling lighter. The weight he had carried for so long was lifted. Justice had been served not just for Alyssa but for Rachel and himself as well. Officer Ramirez approached him, her expression warm and proud. "You did good, kid," she said. "Because of you, we got the truth." Noah nodded, a small smile breaking through his exhaustion. "I just wanted to do the right thing," he said quietly. "You did more than that," Ramirez replied. "You reminded all of us that even the smallest voice can make the biggest difference." As Noah and his mom walked out of the courthouse, the sun shone brightly for the first time in what felt like months. Clutching the sunflower bracelet in his hand, Noah felt a sense of peace. The road to justice had been long and terrifying, but it had been worth it. He looked up at his mom, who smiled down at him. "You're braver than I ever thought possible," she said, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. Noah smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. This was his story, and it was one he would never forget. The journey had been anything but easy for Noah. From witnessing a chilling moment in the park to standing in a courtroom filled with strangers, he had faced challenges no child should ever have to endure. Yet, through it all, his courage never faltered. Noah's story wasn't just about uncovering the truth, it was about the power of bravery. In a world where it would have been easier to stay silent, Noah found the strength to speak up, even when he wasn't sure anyone would listen. He was just a kid, small, scared, and unsure of what he could accomplish, but he proved that even the quietest voices can echo the loudest when they stand for what's right. The trial of Kyle Becker taught more than just one boy's lesson in courage. It reminded everyone involved of the importance of seeking justice, no matter how complicated or frightening the path might seem. Noah's testimony, Rachel Daniels' courage to come forward, and the relentless efforts of the police all contributed to bringing Alyssa's story to light. Together, they proved that standing up for the truth can change lives and save them. As Noah walked out of the courthouse that final day, he held the sunflower bracelet tightly in his hand. It had become more than just a piece of evidence, it was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the possibility of change. The bracelet reminded him that no matter how dark things might seem, There's always light to be found if you're brave enough to look for it. Standing under the bright afternoon sun, Noah took a deep breath and smiled. The weight of guilt and fear that had burdened him for so long had finally lifted. He had done what he set out to do. He had made a difference. Looking up at his mom, who stood proudly by his side, Noah realized that his journey had changed him forever. He wasn't just the quiet boy from the small park anymore. He was someone who had faced his fears, stood for the truth, and proved that courage doesn't have an age limit. And as they walked away from the courthouse, Noah glanced at the sunflower bracelet one last time. A quiet promise forming in his heart, to always be a voice for justice. No matter how small the odds or how big the fight.